Frostpunk 1 had you originally keep in a small city filled with survivors alive in a post-apocalyptic, icy, doomed world. Does Frostpunk 2 do the same thing, or does it spread its wings a bit? Well, in this review, we're going to cover the similarities, differences, and decisions a person has to make when you come face-to-face with two amazing decisions. Put the kids to work, or let the old people wander off into the snow because they're useless. The game starts out around 30 years after the original, and yep, it's still horrible. Sort of like all my videos. If you like them, give them a subscribe, maybe check out the podcast. But thankfully, Frostpunk 2 is better in many ways, except now you'll be currying favor from the shambling hordes of heat seekers who are huddled around hobnobbing about when they should be working. You're fighting off the backstabbing hordes of various factions, all demanding your time and support while solidly giving you none. And to make matters worse, the icicle world of the original game's returning, as does the consistent resource management and harsh day-to-day life. Frostpunk presents a stark world. It's like the day after tomorrow if tomorrow was somehow also the 1800s and steampunk. Replace Jake Gyllenhaal with you, but this time instead of trying to bang Emma Rossum, you're trying to get your game on with an entire city. And that game, of course, is staying alive through harsh summers, which are actually just really bad winters, horrible winters, which are even worse, and always hungry inhabitants demanding leadership. First, I love watching the building in Frostpunk 2 and the presentation. I don't know if it's the friggin' amazing art design or just sitting back as the intricately built structures are created, and my awe that a group of survivors take 3 weeks and about 3 tons of steel girders to build a single shitter outhouse. But man, it does look incredible. Think Legos, except some jackass didn't sort the pieces wrong, and they're all there, and the instructions are easy to understand. The game continues to impress graphically just like the original. Frostpunk had a look all its own and continues to here, and it fits right into the namesake, with homes built next to arcing generators and houses on rifted stilts that stand like spiders all huddling around a fire to keep warm. Snow billows over plateaus, and when blizzards hit, you can see the world react around you. Watching your city pump out heat and people going about their business is awesome, and every single location is intricate down to the people and movements there. When it comes to performance, all of that excellence does come at a cost. When you're using upscaling, it's okay, but without it, man. With a 4090 and a 7800X 3D and 64 gigs of RAM, it hit around 40 FPS with no DLSS at 4K when I was running it at ultra settings. Without any kind of upscale, this thing is an absolute fat swirling pig of resource hoggingness. Also, anything in this game with ultra on it should just be generally considered future proofing. DLSS, ultra quality, also any of those settings, same way. But be aware that without pixel peeping or shadow squinting, the chance of you noticing a setting going from ultra to high and sometimes even medium is pretty damned low. It has frame gen, as I said before, and you may need it depending on your CPU and GPU, which means you will. Now, frame gen for DLSS was not up and running, so I jumped in and used FSR and tested that with a huge number of options from textures, levels, terrains, effects, shadows, fog, processes, meshes, city details, lighting, and various levels of upscaling from every one of the vendors, including TSR itself. There were a lot of options you could choose. With quality DLSS, the FPS jumped to 70. With frame gen, it hovered around 90 to 95. When it comes to settings and their impact, as expected, lighting's the number one setting that you can adjust easily. Setting it down one level got you instantly 68 FPS, and 3 more each step down from there. While shadows netted only about 1 FPS difference, but combined with a couple others as they turned down got you more. 2 other settings, including fog and city details, are good nets for catching FPS, but both can't be adjusted unless you leave your game and go to the main menu. And that's one thing I want to talk about here. Obviously, for some technical reason, you can't switch upscaling types at all while in the game. You have to go to the actual main menu, which honestly, it's been ages since I've seen a game really demand that. But not exactly sure why. There's other issues here. That includes the level of upscaling that can't be switched. So when you're in the game, if you've set it to high and you want to go to performance on upscaling, you have to go back to the main menu and leave your game. And as I said before, fog and city details suffer that same restriction, making setting and adjusting to get the right FPS a bit of a hassle. Luckily, as I said, most of the normal graphics options you can change when you're in the game, but it's just one of those things that really crops up, and it's especially noticeable because of the game's really poor base performance. It did have some stutters on long city sweeps as well when moving around the city quickly, so be aware of that. Now, that being said, while I love the style, the game's performance, as of this time, which is right before the review goes live, is pretty wanting. While the game does look good, that does also indicate that there's not a lot of breathing room without DLSS or FSR. if you're going to be doing anything on even the middle or higher settings. However, when you get those settings down, I have to say Frostpunk, it's set in this historical post-apocalyptic, a time before ours, but one that went haywire, throwing the world into a deep freeze, and you, as one of the survivors of this group, have to remain above ground and try to help this city as a leader, trying to keep the inhabitants alive. That overall feeling of trying to stop everybody from being turned into human-flavored ice cream cones is reflected perfectly in the graphical representation. You're just going to have to do a lot of settings to get it to run smoothly for you. More smoothly are the audio settings and the situation just here as a whole. The music is awesome. It's dire, sad. It's overly huge and orchestral, which is a great fit. It's got an almost interstellar feel. Now, not in the sound or the synths, but just in its grandeur. It's difficult to describe in a genre, but it's sweeping. It's very melancholy, and it captures that feeling of a civilization that is just never not on the edge. And the music adds to that atmosphere greatly. Also, too, do the sound effects. They are good. Admittedly, this game's entire viewpoint is from a bird's eye view, and so a lot of the environmental audio is the majority of what you're going to hear. But zooming in so you can hear the generators thrum and the back-end sounds of the city going on around you is great. The high whip of the wind in the city locations is awesome when you zoom out. And when you go to the exploration map and you start sending people out, which I'll talk about in the gameplay section, there is just this nice, clear, crisp, almost crackling sound of a super cold day that's replicated there. Then you dive back into the city, and you can hear your workers grinding it out again, or erecting a building. Very good audio. When it comes to the voice, there is barely any, but if you click on a faction when you're playing the game, they start calling for you as if they're in a group setting. And then if you click another, they do the same. And all of a sudden, it quickly sounds like everybody needs you. And it's such a small and such a non-thing. It makes you feel like all these people need you, and they need you right away. And there's just no way for you to help all these little useless shits. But you're going to try, and that's the name of the game here. The game builds somewhat on the original story. It's 30 years after the events, with you taking on these leadership roles through chapters across the ages, each new location mending into the next with story beats, expansions, and migrations of your people, with the factions growing in power and splintering within the city. Random events destroying your well-made plans, and the feeling of just pure satisfaction when something goes your way. The gameplay loop is a bit like this. In the main story, you slam down into a new growth of a city, or should I say a faltering city, already with issues that resolve usually pretty quickly around housing, heat, and hungry people. And that's your job, is to get it up and running and then fix whatever the situation is. Most of the main story campaigns have some particular crutch that you need to get by. Here's the steps. The generator supplies warmth. To supply it, you need to have fuel by finding coal at first. But because the people need food to find the coal, which means you need to set them out and crack the ground to get it ready for them to go and dig and grab some grubs. Of course, if the people have food and warmth, once you do that, they want materials to build more homes and make a better life. And if you do build more homes to get more people, that'll mean you need more food. And it's a cycle of life that the core structure of the game is based around, which is hunger, heat, and humanity. Buildings take resources to build, people to man, and energy to run, but even getting to the fuel is a bit of a trek here. It's like finding out you have a really sweet oil field for a backyard, but it's going to cost you exactly $1 more than you can ever get. You're always balancing these things, this money, the squalor, the heat, the disease, as well as the relationships with all the groups in the city. You have to decide how many people are you going to send to go do a job, because you only have a certain amount of manpower that can actually do it. And if you're out of manpower or prefabs or materials, you really can't do anything. This is a game where if you get in trouble and the heat starts killing your people, you can basically overclock your generator at the risk of doing damage to it. This is a city that's basically based around a really crappy Intel PC. But as you do decide to build more locations, expand the ones you have, and tear down the ones that you no longer need, you'll also be researching new technology. And the tree is massive. It is an incredible tech tree and is such a great feeling of fiction matching the function of the game. Separated across categories like city, outer lands, resources, and heat, each choice is an exercise in balance, because every group's always judging you on what you do. You may have 4 different choices for a single upgrade, each with slight alterations that impact each group differently and what they want or like. For example, you might find other ways to take resources from the current ones that has you already speeding up their collection, but at the cost of increasing disease in those citygoers nearby. Or you decide between continuing the use of a mine or moving to another location completely. Hell, you can even switch fuel types entirely by focusing research on alternative fuels, moving from, for instance, coal to oil. Always watching out to verify You have the proper resources and ways to get them, and not only for the changes, but for possibly moving people to a new location, to mine it, and so forth. You also get some heady changes in many places, including expeditions. You basically send these people out to explore the wasteland, tracking down resources with your explorers and trying to join together outposts and cities and different resources you find, trying to get supplies to add to the meager amount usually available in the starting location. Taking your little frozen mansicles and thrusting them out into the ice sheet to try to find just one more item is such a great emotional pull. You send them in one section to the next, every new location handedly outfitting you with a warning that starts and just basically says, there's a high chance of many of your people dying. Sometimes there's a low chance, but those usually give you less. Everyone is replaceable though, except you of course, so expect to lose some of them as they forge icy rivers, they fling themselves across frozen ravines, all in the name of getting a couple more pounds of seal blubber for your people back home to make some delicious fat-based tea or something. Once you do find something, though, you usually have a choice. Take it all and risk something, probably your people, a couple of them, or you go the slower route and perhaps get a long-term solution and take a little bit at a time, which then has you making trails connecting a series of safe points back to your city so that further explorers can go back and find the same place. Because I assume traipsing across a damn glacier where safe things are white and dangerous things are also white probably needs some markers. The game also has seasons, and these affect not only the expeditions I just talked about, but the main city itself. These are massive drops in temperature. Seasons continue to be your Donner Party moment here too, trying to get through the coldest deep freezes when machines start breaking down and your equipment makes everything less efficient, or when the overland map doesn't let you explore at all because a massive storm makes finding new locations practically impossible. You watch that food drop and you read each day leading off with this amazing doom scroll of deaths from disease, hunger, and cold, reminding you that everyone is probably looking at you and going, this leader is absolutely shit. And it's that balance, that social balance that you have in the city that ends up paying off everywhere else. Sometimes it's just about getting what you need right, and then because something goes wrong, it's about fixing those issues, or fixing well-laid plans that end up looking like a frozen version of Pompeii 1,000 years from now as some maintenance piece breaks down and buildings start not working. And then suddenly, one group that you had to treat just a tiny bit harshly decides this is the perfect time to call your leadership into question. Because here, each group you have in the city contests one another sometimes, or most of the time. They're always there to try to make the best deals for themselves. And you can pass and suggest laws for the city that push and pull the city in different directions. Some choices may align with a group that thinks that nature should take its course and doesn't like artificial things. Mankind adds to nature and choices that align with that. Another group may favor faith, always knocking on people's doors, asking them if they've ever heard of the Watchtower magazine. You may ask them for favors and they can ask you for favors or offer you some, and it's consistently negotiating back and forth to get laws passed and to keep them on your good side. Because if one of these groups hates you, they usually give you an ultimatum, which means fix your crap right away. And it usually isn't just that, it's almost always fix your crap and also do something really good for us, or they kick you out. Researching goes hand in hand with the laws that you make as well, because those choices sway the city one way or the other towards a particular attitude, like adaptation, merit, or tradition. Each group can also get splinter groups when they decide that they don't all agree within the same group and they splinter off from each other. And now you have two groups with their own demands and expectations and vices that originally maybe you got along with a little bit, but this new group you don't. And so now you have two instead of one, and they both usually have pretty opposite ideas. So while you're balancing your heat and your resources, you're balancing your building and you're destructing, you're balancing your exploration, you're also balancing the idea that you are a leader and have to consistently make everybody at least somewhat happy. Frostpunk fixes some of the issues I had with the first one as well, which was that for the most part, every single time you played it and talked to somebody about it, you found out that a lot of people took the same steps and same choices, because throwing kids into child slavery is hilarious, but the number of choices there just didn't really met out. A lot of times you looked at it and you were like, this choice just makes sense overall. Here, there is a great deal more flexibility. For example, the world turns and events begin building up, crime, poverty, back and forth, and you have to consistently try to figure out if you want to support or change something, or if you think that some current plan you have may end up fixing a problem in the city itself. For example, if people are in squalor and getting sick, you can enact laws with all of that it entails it, and you can upgrade something in research, which might also fix the same issue. So technically you have two ways to go about it. You could also just destroy that entire housing area and build another one somewhere else, because perhaps that housing area is too close to a building that does industrial work. What grabs you is that the hook of looking around to find everything is awesome. Trying to look for more efficiencies, or to rob some small bit of extra workforce and put them to better use, or at least you hope you can. The HUD could use some work, and damned if it didn't have floating menus that were adhered to spots that were basically the city buildings in the game map. So a lot of times you'd click one, you couldn't see all of the map, and you had to sort of move forward or back to see it all. I didn't like that. I would rather have them be attached to the actual HUD itself, and I couldn't find an option for that. But figuring out how to best outfit the city, what sacrifices to make and what choices to make, that's the juice. It's at those times that you find yourself just feverishly looking at ways to keep people alive, asking them to go hungry, or moving people from businesses less important to those that are. And with various difficulties, those successful chapters can turn into dead ends as you find food running out midwinter, you get kicked out as a leader in the snowy landscape to freeze to death, or some other bad thing happens. Now, that being said, it can be odd sometimes. You load into a new story location, you have to, a lot of times, start from basically scratch. But at other times, when you're so deep into the tech tree and the knowledge trees and trying to decide if you want to put a monorail in your city so that people can get to and from work faster, you realize the city builder parts of the game, it's not necessarily hands-off. It's more that you're a city planner. You're not there doing the actual work, so be prepared. There were a couple times where I was like, that's not exactly how I was hoping this would look or set up. It's just the way it is. But a little like the world itself, the game does have a couple issues that make it harder. First, apparently, once these guys and gals decide on something, just get out of the damn way, because for some reason, you can't really stop a building from being erected once you give it the go order, despite if it's not even close to being done. I could destroy it once it was built, though. Also, the balance is right on the raggedy edge, and there were times where I felt like I was storing enough supplies, I was in good shape for the winter, only to meet a game over screen pretty quickly, because some group demanded that I build something they wanted, and another demanded I vote with them on something that didn't really pan out the same way. And then a blizzard came in and took what would have been more than enough resources and turned it to surprisingly almost impossible levels of attrition that felt terribly unwinnable. In the end, I'm actually fine with a lot of this RNG, especially in a game like this, but it didn't happen just once, so be prepared. You do have the ability to jump into what they call a utopia setting, which is the different maps, and set it up the way you want with the different groups and factions in the cities, and crank up the difficulty there. That was quite a bit of fun. And weirdly enough, I think I sort of enjoyed that a little bit more because it didn't have the story set up, and being able to jump in and just say, hey, I want this to be hard, but I want to be able to sort of feel as if whatever I do, it's on me versus some arbitrary setup from the story. Your mileage will vary. The story is sort of what it is. Also, I love the overworld screen and exploring with my settlers and getting new resources, collecting more survivors and so on. God damn if it's not a bit clunky. That's the rub with Frostpunk. It never builds itself as a Dark Souls of city builders, but it's not consistently saying it isn't either. In the same way Snowpiercer isn't a show you want to watch while eating or right after a funeral, Frostpunk 2 isn't a game you want to leap into without an understanding that good gameplay and planning does not promise success, because weather doesn't give a shit if you're an amazing painter. And having to consistently identify what you need to build something and if it's going to be worth it, changing the amount of people in it to get more workforce to crack more land, it is exciting stuff. They say they have another patch coming as well, and that could help the performance. I think the game is almost eye-wateringly beautiful in the artistic design and ideas. It just sings to me. With so much going on the screen compared to other city builders, though, and with such a powerful system that I have, the performance, scary as shit. And I'm really crossing my fingers for a good optimization patch. When it comes to fun, did all of those issues cause me to not enjoy myself? In many ways, Frostpunk at times felt like a slimmer but properly unique game of its own. Frostpunk 2 offers a vast improvement and a massive amount of choice, but it also solidly says if you want to freeze to death this time, it's going to be because you're dumb or sometimes just because terrible things happen. Either way, it's still somehow your fault. I can take that fault and that risk, and Frostpunk 2 rewards you for it. Few things are as gratifying, guys, as scratching out of the ice on the other end of a horrendous winter to find out that most everyone lived and only a few hundred people succumbed to some questionable disease somewhere. Rating. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, deep sale, or never touch rating system. Well, I'm not completely done with this one. I wanted to give my thoughts because the game like this, As much as I enjoyed it, there were some performance issues, and I want to make sure that part was known. So currently, I would say, if you want to get it, be aware of pretty huge performance idiosyncrasies you might run into, as they exist in a number of places here, including just being very cumbersome to adjust them. Otherwise, it's probably best to wait a little bit and see how everybody else's performance is starting to met out. Now, I'll be revisiting this one during the podcast to see where their last patch stands, and if it's improved, greatly. But currently, this is a review in progress. It's got a tentative, wait for improvements kind of score to it. It's just one of those things. I don't like to do these, but right now I wanted to make sure that at least people got an idea of some of the issues that they may run into. As always, if you like these videos, give them a thumbs up. Check out the podcast on the other podcast channel in the description. You should see a bunch of reviews from me, Dead Rising, the remake, as well as Plucky Squire, and even more coming this week. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your week.
A generation ago, we fled the crumbling British Empire as the world rose around us.